The 1970s had a way of producing music that made people genuinely uncomfortable. Songs that pushed against authority, religion, decency standards, and just about every social norm that existed. Radio stations panicked, parent groups organized, politicians gave speeches, and the records kept selling. So today, we're counting down the 12 most disrespectful songs from the 1970s that almost got banned. Number 12. Some Girls by the Rolling Stones, 1978.
Some girls buy me clothes, some girls give me...
By 1978, the Rolling Stones had been making people uncomfortable for 15 years, which is exactly why Some Girls caught so many people off guard. The title track from their 1978 album of the same name contained verses that made sweeping, provocative generalizations about women of different nationalities and ethnicities, delivered with the casual confidence of a band that had decided, long ago, that provoking discomfort was a legitimate creative tool, and that apologies were for someone else.
Some girls heart attacks, some girls I give up.
Jesse Jackson led a public campaign calling for the song to be withdrawn from release, arguing that the lyrics about black women in particular were offensive, reductive, and harmful. He organized boycotts and spoke publicly about the record in terms that generated national news coverage over a sustained period, press attention that no promotional budget could have purchased. Jackson wrote to Rolling Stones Records formally requesting that the offending content be removed from the album. Atlantic Records, which distributed the record in the United States, sent letters to radio stations flagging the content. The Stones did not withdraw the album, did not edit the song, and did not issue an apology. The album sold enormously regardless. It reached number 1 in the United States and the UK, and became one of their best-selling records of the decade.
Chinese girls can be gentle, they're really such a tease.
What made Some Girls particularly difficult to categorize in terms of its intent was Mick Jagger's consistent refusal to treat the controversy as a serious moral matter. He discussed the song in interviews with a detachment that many found more provocative than the lyrics themselves. The record remained in print without alteration, the controversy faded, and the song became a standard part of retrospectives on the band's catalog.
Some girls buy me clothes, some girls give me...
Number 11. Je t'aime, moi non plus, by Serge Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin, 1969, banned through the early 1970s. The version featuring actress Jane Birkin was released in 1969 and remained one of the most widely banned recordings anywhere in the world well into the early 1970s. The BBC banned it. The Vatican condemned it by name in an official statement, one of the very few occasions in the history of popular music when the Vatican weighed in on a specific record. In Italy, the label that distributed the record was prosecuted in court. Radio stations across France, Spain, Germany, and multiple other European countries removed it from rotation after listener complaints. What made the banning attempts so persistent and so futile simultaneously was that the song did not rely on explicit language. It achieved its effect entirely through sound, through the quality of the voices and what was clearly occurring during the recording, which meant that anyone who heard it understood immediately what it was describing, and that understanding was impossible to unhear regardless of what language the lyrics were in. Parents who had no knowledge of French understood the record perfectly well. The song reached number 1 in the UK and charted across Europe, and its infamy spread to every country where it played. The combination of critical condemnation and commercial success was, by the standards of the era, essentially unprecedented for a pop record. It remained in print, remained controversial, and remained one of the most recognized recordings of the early part of the decade for years after its release. Number 10. Short People by Randy Newman, 1977.
Short people got no reason.
Randy Newman has spent his entire career writing songs that say, disturbing things with enormous musical charm, and Short People, released on his 1977 album Little Criminals, is his most famous and most persistently misunderstood example of that approach. The song presents a narrator who declares an irrational, comprehensive hatred of short people, in terms that are as logically detailed as they are obviously absurd. Newman intended the song as a satire of prejudice itself. The argument being that the narrator's reasoning was so transparently ridiculous that the song would read as a parody of bigotry rather than an expression of it. Newman had used this technique throughout his career, writing from the perspective of characters whose views he found contemptible.
Don't want no short people. Don't want no...
A significant portion of the listening public did not read it that way. The song reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1978, which meant it was effectively inescapable on radio for several weeks, and radio stations in multiple markets received complaints from listeners who were short, or who had family members who were short, and who found the song genuinely hurtful, regardless of its satirical framing. The offense was real, even if the target was not what Newman intended. Maryland state legislators introduced a formal bill to ban the song from radio stations operating within the state, a piece of legislation that did not ultimately pass, but that received substantial national press coverage and prompted debates about the limits of satire in popular music. Newman spent years in interviews patiently explaining that the song was a parody of prejudice, not an endorsement of it. The people who were offended were generally not persuaded by the explanation. The song remained one of his biggest commercial hits, and the gap between his intention and his audience's response became one of the more instructive examples of the decade.
Don't want no short people. Don't...
Number 9. The Pill by Loretta Lynn, 1975. Loretta Lynn had built her career on songs that addressed the realities of women's lives in rural America, with a directness that country music had rarely attempted. Songs like Don't Come Home A-Drinkin' with Lovin' on Your Mind and You Ain't Woman Enough had already established her as someone willing to write from a woman's perspective without softening the edges. The Pill, released in 1975, continued in that tradition, a song about a married woman celebrating access to oral contraceptives and the freedom from continuous pregnancy that they represented. The subject matter was considered so controversial for country radio that many stations refused to play it for months after its release, and some refused entirely. The song eventually reached number 5 on the Billboard country charts, making it a genuine commercial success despite the widespread bans. The road to that chart position was considerably longer and more contested than it would have been for any other record Lynn had released. Some radio programmers cited moral objections rooted in religious views about birth control. Others framed their refusal in terms of content being inappropriate for general family listening hours. The Grand Ole Opry, the central institution of country music establishment, was slow to embrace the material. Lynn, who had grown up in genuine poverty in rural Kentucky, had married at 13 and had personal experience with the realities the song described, did not back down from the material or offer any public apology for it. The song is now recognized as a significant document of American social history in the form of a country record, a piece of music that arrived at a specific cultural moment and captured something real about what was changing in American women's lives. Number 8. Sheer Heart Attack by Queen, 1977. The song, released in 1977 on the News of the World album, is a 2-minute burst of deliberately abrasive hard rock that Queen described as their answer to the punk movement that had made elaborate rock productions culturally unfashionable almost overnight. The title alone, referencing a cardiac event, was enough to draw complaints from medical organizations who felt it was irresponsible to use a life-threatening condition as the name of an aggressive rock song. The BBC was cautious about it. Some radio programmers found its relentless volume and tempo difficult to fit into regular rotation. What made Sheer Heart Attack genuinely disrespectful, by the standards of the 1970s rock world, was how thoroughly it dismissed the sophistication that Queen had built their reputation on. Freddie Mercury, who could perform operatic rock at one end of the spectrum, was here screaming over an arrangement that prioritized noise and velocity over everything the band had previously stood for. It was a deliberate act of musical self-subversion that confused their existing audience and annoyed the punk community it was trying to engage. The BBC eventually played it. Nobody was permanently damaged. But the song announced, in the most direct terms available, that no one in 1977 was entirely safe from their own preconceptions being challenged. Number 7. White Punks on Dope by The Tubes, 1975. The Tubes were one of the most theatrically provocative acts of the mid-1970s, and White Punks on Dope, released on their debut album in 1975, was the song that introduced their particular version of outrage to a wider audience. The song describes a group of wealthy, bored teenagers in the San Fernando Valley who are engaged in a lifestyle of substance use and general aimlessness, delivered with a combination of contempt and sympathy that made it unclear whether the song was condemning or celebrating what it described. The BBC banned it immediately upon its UK release. In the United States, numerous radio stations refused to add it to their rotation on the grounds that the title alone, naming a controlled substance directly, violated their standards for broadcast content. The ban in the UK actually drove the song's profile higher, as banned records in the British market during this period tended to generate the kind of press coverage that legitimate promotion could not. The Tubes built their following significantly on the basis of the song's notoriety, establishing themselves as a live act known for theatrical excess that matched the provocation of their recordings. White Punks on Dope never became a mainstream chart success, but it became something arguably more durable, a cult record whose reputation survived because of the opposition it generated. Number 6. Jet Boy, Jet Girl by Elton Motello, 1977.
Jet boy, jet girl, gonna take you round the world.
Released in 1977 by Belgian musician Elton Motello, this record is one of the more genuinely challenging entries in the catalog of songs that attracted serious censorship attempts during the decade. The song was constructed over a punk rock arrangement and addressed subject matter that mainstream radio in the 1970s would not touch under any circumstances. The BBC banned it. It received no mainstream radio airplay in the United States. The version most widely heard outside of Belgium was a French adaptation, recorded by Ça Plaine pour Moi artist Plastic Bertrand, also in 1977, which used the same musical backing track but replaced the original lyrics with completely different content. Plastic Bertrand's version became an international hit, while Motello's original remained largely unknown outside of dedicated collectors of the period. The two records share their musical DNA entirely, and their commercial trajectories could not be more different, which makes the story of how content determines outcome one of the more instructive case studies of the era.
He gives me head, jet boy, jet girl.
Number 5. Bodies by the Sex Pistols, 1977. The Sex Pistols appear twice on this list because they earned it. Bodies, released on their only studio album Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, in October 1977, is the more viscerally confrontational of their two entries. A song about abortion that approached the subject with a graphic directness that had no equivalent in mainstream popular music before or since. The BBC refused to add it to any playlist. Commercial radio stations across the UK declined to play it. The subject matter alone was sufficient to trigger refusal. And the production, John Lydon's screaming vocal delivery, Steve Jones's abrasive guitar, ensured that no one who heard it could maintain any comfortable distance from what it was saying. The song did not have a specific political position on abortion that it was trying to advocate. It was not a protest song in the conventional sense. What it did was take a subject that polite society in 1977 handled with either silence or careful euphemism, and treat it with a rawness that forced the listener into direct confrontation with the reality being described. That approach was, in its own way, more disturbing to many listeners than any specific argument could have been. Nevermind the Bollocks reached number 1 in the UK despite receiving virtually no radio support. an outcome that demonstrated how thoroughly the Sex Pistols audience had decided to bypass the traditional mechanisms of the music industry entirely. Bodies was the track that most clearly explained why those mechanisms had decided to shut the door on the band in the first place. Number 4. Star Star by the Rolling Stones, 1973. The Rolling Stones released Star Star on their 1973 album Goat's Head Soup, and the song's original working title, which was explicit enough that it cannot be reproduced in most broadcast contexts, tells you everything you need to know about where it sat relative to broadcast standards and industry norms. The lyrical content made direct and detailed reference to sexual activity involving a groupie and named specific real celebrities in that context, which created a legal dimension to the controversy that went beyond the standard discussion of offensive content. Atlantic Records, which distributed the album in the United States, required the band to use the sanitized title Star Star for the release. The label's legal team was involved in the process. Radio programmers in the United States and the UK almost universally declined to add the track to any rotation. The BBC did not list it. American stations in conservative markets avoided the album's more extreme content generally, with this track cited specifically. None of this prevented the album from reaching number 1 in both the UK and the United States in 1973. By that point, the Rolling Stones audience was large and committed enough that radio support was no longer the determining factor in whether a record sold. The audience went directly to stores. Star Star exists today as one of the more explicit pieces of content to appear on a major mainstream album of the decade, commercially released, widely reviewed, and almost entirely absent from the airwaves at the same time. Number 3. My Generation by The Who, 1965. Essential throughout the 1970s. Originally released in 1965, My Generation was one of the most played records on rock radio throughout the entire 1970s, and its sustained presence on the airwaves made it a recurring source of friction between generations for a full decade after its initial release. The BBC banned the original recording in 1965, citing Roger Daltrey's stuttering vocal delivery as potentially offensive to people with speech impediments, a justification that was widely regarded at the time, and since as a pretext for objecting to the song's actual content. The content was straightforward, a direct, unqualified declaration that the older generation should move aside for the younger one, delivered with Pete Townshend's increasingly aggressive guitar and the barely controlled energy of a band that seemed genuinely indifferent to whether any adult approved of what they were doing. Throughout the 1970s, as the generation that had first made the song a hit began having children of their own, those children found the record and played it, and discovered that their parents found it just as unsettling in 1975 as a different set of adults had in 1965. The song's ability to provoke across decades without changing a note is one of the more remarkable things about it. Number 2. Physical Graffiti, Custard Pie by Led Zeppelin, 1975. Led Zeppelin's 1975 double album Physical Graffiti contained material across its 4 sides that pushed against broadcast standards in various ways. But Custard Pie, the opening track, concentrated the problem most directly. The song draws on a long blues tradition of using food as coded language for sexual subject matter, a tradition that stretches back to recordings from the 1920s and 1930s. Led Zeppelin had used this approach throughout their career, and Custard Pie is one of the more explicit applications of it. Radio programmers who had spent years navigating the Zeppelin catalog were not surprised. The BBC, which had maintained a complicated relationship with the band throughout the early 1970s, was cautious. American radio stations in conservative markets avoided it. None of this prevented physical graffiti from reaching number 1 in the United States and the UK in 1975, or from becoming one of the most commercially successful releases of the year. By 1975, Led Zeppelin had established themselves so thoroughly as a commercial force that radio support was secondary to their audience's direct purchasing behavior. The record sold because people went to the store and bought it, not because anyone on the radio told them to. Number 1. God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols, 1977.
Save the Queen! She ain't no human being!
There is no more fitting entry at the top of this list. Released in May 1977 to coincide with Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee celebrations, God Save the Queen was the most deliberately provocative record released by a major act during the entire decade, and the response to it was proportional to that provocation in every respect. The BBC refused to play it. The Independent Broadcasting Authority, which regulated commercial radio in the UK, issued guidance that effectively prevented it from receiving airplay on any licensed British radio station. The majority of major record retailers refused to stock it. The Boots pharmacy chain, Woolworths, and W.H. Smith, 3 of the largest retail outlets in the country, pulled it from their shelves or declined to carry it at all. Virgin Records, which had signed the Sex Pistols after they had been dropped by EMI and A&M in quick succession, operated its own record shops and stocked it there. Those shops experienced unusual demand. The independent chart compilers who tracked sales, relying on actual purchase data from a range of retailers, showed the record reaching number 1 during Jubilee week. The official UK chart, compiled by a different methodology and overseen by the BBC, listed it at number 2 behind Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It. The discrepancy was reported on extensively in the British press, and the question of whether the chart had been manipulated to prevent the record from reaching the top position during the Jubilee celebrations was discussed openly and seriously by journalists and music industry figures at the time. No definitive official answer was ever given. The Sex Pistols were already the most controversial act in Britain. They had used offensive language in a live television interview, had been fired by 2 record labels within months of signing, and had generated more sustained negative press coverage than any other musical act in recent memory. God Save the Queen was their response to the spectacle of national celebration surrounding the monarchy, and it was received as exactly what it was: a direct attack on an institution that most of the country was spending the week honoring. For the generation of young people who bought it, it felt like the most honest record anyone had made in years. For the generation of adults who were appalled by it, it felt like something that should not have been allowed to exist.
Save the Queen! She ain't no human being!
Both of those reactions were correct, in their own way. And the fact that the record exists, that it was sold, that it reached something very close to the top of the charts, while every legitimate institution in British public life was trying to prevent people from hearing it. That is one of the more genuinely remarkable things to happen in popular music during the 1970s. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel, so you never miss out on more music content like this.